What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is June 21st, 2026, about 4:25 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 22nd book in our Book to React series, where we read an entire text cover to cover on live with the people. Think of this as an open source book club, an open source library, free for you to join in on the conversation as we devour Leon Trotsky's magnificent tome, The History of the Russian Revolution. Right now, we are in the middle of volume 2 of this 3-volume series. We're nearing the end of this text. Pretty soon, we only have about, 12 or 13 more episodes to go. It's been a wonderful read. Last night, I was actually hanging out with my friend who is a Stalinist. He invited a friend who was a Trotskyist, and we had a very good conversation on many of the concepts of this book. So once again, I'm trying to let people know that not only are we reading these texts to gain theory for the praxis that we want to do to bring about socialism in the West, particularly in America, which is the primary audience that I have, but we also should be in community with other leftists. So if you know somebody who's reading the same books or is interested in the same politics, I highly encourage you to actually go outside, touch grass, throw the football, have a beer with them, do like what I do, you know what I mean? Don't just be online talking about this. Actually be in community with these people. Because even though I don't identify as a Trotskyist, I very much enjoy the company of Trotskyists. I very much enjoy the company of my Stalinist comrades, my traditional ML comrades, Dem socks, social Dems, anarchists, whatever. You have to be in community with the people that share your politics so that we can strategize, organize, and get together to make a better society. So, in our previous live stream, episode 32, we were reading about how the guy named Kerensky, who is leading the provisional government of Russia, he's leading a reactionary sort of movement against the Bolsheviks, the Soviets, etc. He's also working in tandem with a guy named Kornilov, who is a military general seeking to bring about a military dictatorship in Russia at this time. And Kerensky and Kornilov cannot see eye to eye. They cannot see eye to eye. And so now Kerensky is sort of turning on Kornilov as well. There was also a very good Star Wars metaphor that I made in the previous episode, which all of you should go check out to grasp how the politics of bourgeois Russia were playing out at that time. Shout out to my guy James Wright, who is a top commissar up in here. Salute to James Wright. He's going to make sure all the fascists and white supremacists and trolls get the boot. So respect James Wright. He's going to put some people in the gulag or the re-education camp if they misdirect the conversation. So salute to James Wright for joining. He says, have you ever read the bio of Trotsky by Robert Service? It's very readable. I have not yet. This is the first Trotsky text that I am ever reading in my life, knowingly, because I've read other socialist texts and they could have been written by Trotskyists or maybe even by Trotsky, because I don't know, I've had a long life. I'm 35 years old, so there's stuff that I've done that I forgot about, to keep it absolutely real. But yeah, as far as I know, this is the first Trotsky text that I can recall reading. I'm really enjoying it. Thank you for the book recommendation by Robert Service. I might be interested in reading a bio of Trotsky, but that will be further on down the line. As right now, what we will be doing with upcoming book to reacts, at least throughout the 20s, because right now we're at our 22nd book. What I plan to do for book react is dive into Marxist classics and also books outside of the Marxist pantheon. So I do have, Che Guevara's writings on the agenda. I do have more Black Panther text coming up on the agenda, because what I want to do with the Marxism that I'm trying to propagate on this channel is expand it beyond just the realm of the white leftists and also fixation upon the Soviet Union, which I do believe is a problem amongst the left in general. We fixate too much on the Soviet Union and not much on, what happened in Benin, what happened in Laos, what happened in Vietnam, what's happening in Cuba. You get what I'm saying? So I want to expand it to the global south, melanated peoples who have picked up the banner of socialism to try to make their societies better. So that's the objective. Read Marxist canon, of course, so like reading works of Engels, Marx, more Lenin, Stalin, you get what I'm saying? But also, going to those lesser known Marxists, such as Ho Chi Minh, for example, and definitely some Mao as well. Okay, so James Wright says, that sounds good. I don't know much about Che. I have a book here on my computer titled Venceremos, which means forward, I believe, in Spanish. The Venceremos book has like a collection of Che's writings. I believe most, if not all, of his writings. The book is long too. It's over 1,000 pages. So that will be another monster text we will tackle for Book React. But it's still something I want to do because I admire Che a lot from what I know about him. I saw the movie made about him by Guillermo del Toro. My Spanish is horrible. Go check out the movie about Che and the Cuban Revolution that Guillermo del Toro made. It's very good. It's 2 movies. You should go check that out. That's a movie recommendation. Definitely interested in reading some Che and also other Latin American Marxist communists as well. Bebo PC says, wow, I'm super interested in the Black Panther aspect. That would be cool. We already tackled one Black Panther book. So if you're not interested in Trotsky, Bebo PC, I don't know who you are. This is the first time I'm seeing you. Check out the reading we did of Huey P. Newton's book, Revolutionary Suicide, which is one of the most popular booked reacts we've ever done. We have the vertical live stream and the horizontal live stream of Huey P. Newton's Revolutionary Suicide. Fantastic book as well. The only parts of that book I didn't like was Huey going off about his trial and his court case, but hearing about his early life, hearing about how he came to Marxism, hearing about how Huey P. Newton formed the Black Panther Party, it's absolutely inspiring. Definitely gave me new insight on revolutionary struggle. Definitely check out Revolutionary Suicide. Either listen to the book react we did for that, which has some great commentary from me, like I was going crazy. But also, if you don't like me reading it or my reactions to it, just read the book for yourself. Once again, I don't do these live streams to make myself famous, to make myself rich. It's just to share great literature that I find and also put y'all up on books. So even if you don't want to listen to me read it, pick the book up for yourself, because I'm trying to demonstrate to people that you can find time to read. A lot of people go years without reading one book. Some people go a whole lifetime without reading a single book, and that's not okay. And especially for us black men. For black men, it's important that we read, because they kept it illegal for us for a long time, and that's for a good reason. Okay? Bebo PC says, I did my thesis on him. So I don't know who you mean by thesis on him. Do you mean Huey P. Newton? He kind of sucked. Huey P. Newton kind of sucked. Okay? I don't know. I would never say Huey P. Newton sucked. That's crazy. And clarify what you mean by him. If you mean Che Guevara did not suck as well. None of our none of our revolutionary, forebearers sucked. These are people that risked their lives to create a better world. Explain what you mean by you wrote your thesis on him. Who is him? Okay? Please, everybody, there's a delay in the live stream. So if you use pronouns like he, him, she, her, etc., do not use them. Try to use instead the name of the person so I know who you're referring to. That way, I'm able to respond to the comment and also make the playback better for people. This is a back and forth with the people. So if you are interacting in the live stream, make sure you put the name of the person. That way I can react to it, okay? Anyway, last comment I'll read before we jump into the reading. Bebo PC says, you're doing a great job. Keep it up. Thank you. Once again, another rule for the live stream. Please, people, do not call me brother. I am not your brother. I have a real brother, and you're probably not him. Call me comrade. Call me Simon. Call me Mr. Hill. But do not call me brother. That is highly, highly annoying. Very annoying. I probably won't even read your comment if you call me brother or bro. And once again, please do not use pronouns when referring to people in the chat. Refer to them by their name. That way I can give proper reaction to the comment as well. Okay? Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into chapter 32 for episode 33 of Book React. The bourgeoisie measures strength with the democracy. On the 28th of August, while fright was shaking the Winter Palace like a fever, the commander of the Savage Division, Prince Bagration, informed Kornilov by telegraph that the natives would fulfill their duty to the fatherland and, at the command of their supreme hero, would shed the last drop of their blood. Only a few hours later, the division came to a halt, and on the 31st of August, a special deputation with the same Bagration at the head assured Kerensky that the division would submit absolutely to the provisional government. All this happened not only without a battle, but without the firing of a single shot. To say nothing of its last, the division did not shed even its first drop of blood. The soldiers of Kornilov never even made the attempt to employ weapons to force their way to Petrograd. The officers did not dare give them the command. The government troops were nowhere obliged to resort to force in stopping the onslaught of the Kornilov army. The conspiracy disintegrated, crumbled, evaporated in the air. All right? Shout out to Alex Desmond. He says, the eloquence of your presentation and the alacrity which you address comments are truly commendable. A masterclass in cognitive communication and solution-oriented thinking. I appreciate that, sir. I appreciate that, sir. But I have to ask this question, because this is not about aggrandizing me. This is about dealing with revolutionary theory. Alex Desmond, I want to ask you, are we living through pre-revolutionary times in Western society? I will assume you're from America because most of my audience tends to be from America, or let's also assume the UK as well because I'll have a sizable audience from the UK. Do you think we are now living through pre-revolutionary times? Because a lot of the parallels that I'm seeing in our timeline and also in Trotsky's time correspond. For example, the bourgeois, liberal, Keir Starmer-esque type of leader of Russia, Kerensky, is willing to use brute force to put down any sort of revolutionary potential of the working masses. Similar to how Keir Starmer is putting the boot of the state's force onto the people who are protesting against the genocide in Gaza. Shout out to Palestine Action. Okay? So shout out to RLH up in the chat as well. And yeah, I hope my guy James Wright is still in the live stream to make sure that the white supremacists will get slapped down. Continuing here. So, in order to understand this, it is only necessary to look closely at the powers which had come in conflict. First of all, we must notice, and this will not be an unexpected discovery, that the staff of the conspiracy was the same old czarist staff, composed of clerical people without brains, incapable of thinking out in advance 2 or 3 moves in the vast game they had undertaken. Notwithstanding the fact that Kornilov had set the day of the insurrection several weeks in advance, nothing whatever had been foreseen or properly reckoned upon. The purely military preparation of the uprising was carried out in an inept, slovenly, and light-headed manner. Complicated changes in the organization and commanding staff were undertaken on the eve of the action, just on the run. The Savage Division, which was to deal the first blow of the revolution, consisted, all told, of 1,350 fighters, and they were short 600 rifles, 1,000 lances, and 500 sabers. I'm surprised Trotsky didn't say they didn't have 700 bicycles. Once again, going back to the bicycle brigade. That's an old running joke from this book. Continuing. 5 days before the beginning of active fighting, Kornilov gave an order for the transformation of the division into a corps. This measure, which any school book would condemn, was obviously considered necessary in order to attract the officers with higher pay. A telegram stating that the lacking weapons would be supplied at Pskov, writes Martinov, was received by Bagration only on August 31st, after the complete collapse of the whole enterprise. The sending of instructors from the front to Petrograd was also taken up at headquarters only at the very last moment. The officers accepting the commission were liberally supplied with money and private cars. But the patriotic heroes were in no great hurry, it seems, to save the fatherland. 2 days later, railroad communications between headquarters and the capital were cut off, and the majority of the heroes had not yet arrived at the place of their proposed deeds. Once again, very interesting how the Russian bourgeoisie really believed that they had a legitimate right. They had a legitimate right to power when they are saying that we are going to put on a coup to fight against these workers, these Soviets, etc. But the soldiers they send out there don't even have shoes, are lacking in guns, rifles, lances. Maybe that's another word for bayonet. They didn't even think to supply their people with the weapons they needed to put on a coup. Just pure incompetence or greed. Because think about the inverse. The officers that they were going to use to stage this coup, they got money, they got cars, they got bad bitches. Them boys started balling. How do right-wingers continue to support hierarchy? How do they continue to support the expropriation of wealth from the masses? And still, the elites show them that they don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about them. It's so funny because similar in our lifetime, you have people that are veterans that have went to war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, whatever, and they come back and the VA is trash. And yet and still those people vote Republican. Make that make sense. Make it make sense. Continuing here. The capital, however, had its own organization of Kornilovists, numbering about 2,000. The conspirators here were divided into groups according to the special tasks allotted to them. Seizure of armored automobiles, arrest and murder of the more eminent members of the Soviet, arrest of the provisional government, capture of the more important public institutions. Winberg, the president of the League of Military Duty, known to us above, says, by the time Krymov's troops arrived, the principal forces of the revolution were supposed to have already been broken, annihilated, or rendered harmless, so that Krymov's task would be merely to restore order in the town. At Mogilev, to be sure, they considered this program exaggerated and relied upon Krymov for most of the work, but headquarters did also expect very serious help from the detachments of the Republican Center. As it turned out, however, the Petrograd conspirators never showed themselves for an instant, never lifted a voice, never moved a finger. It was quite as though they did not exist in the world. Winberg explains this mystery rather simply. It seems that the superintendent of the intelligence service, Colonel Hyman, spent the decisive hours in a roadhouse somewhere outside of town, while Colonel Sidorin, whose duty it was, under the immediate command of Kornilov, to coordinate the activities of all the patriotic societies of the capital, and Colonel Dusemetir, the head of the military department, had disappeared without a trace and could not be found anywhere. The Cossack Colonel Dutov, who was supposed to take action in the guise of Bolsheviks, subsequently complained. I ran and called people to come into the streets, but nobody followed me. The sums of money set aside for organization were, according to Winberg, appropriated by the principal participants and squandered on dinner parties. Colonel Sidorin, according to Denikin's assertion, fled to Finland, taking with him the last remnants of the treasury of the organization, something around 100 or 150,000 rubles. Livov, whom we last saw under arrest in the Winter Palace, subsequently told about one of these secret contributors who was to deliver to some officers a considerable sum of money, but upon arriving at the designated place, found the conspirators in such a state of inebriation that he could not deliver the goods. Winberg himself thinks that if he had not been for these truly vexatious accidents, the plan might have been crowned with complete success. But the question remains, why was a patriotic enterprise entered into and surrounded, for the most part, by drunkards, spendthrifts, and traitors? It is not because every historic task mobilizes the cadres that are adequate to it. So once again, I do think partially the Russian Revolution was successful because the people they were fighting against were greedy and incompetent. And I also think, in a Marxist sense, and Trotsky has made this argument before, the Russian bourgeoisie was not fully formed and developed, thus allowing us to jump from traditional Marxism to Marxism-Leninism, saying that the proletariat should march towards socialism even if the bourgeoisie have not fully established capitalism, which is very important to us. I've talked about this in the previous live stream, but I'll make this absolutely clear. What separates an orthodox Marxist from somebody who considers himself a Marxist-Leninist, and also by extension I would say a Maoist, is the idea that the bourgeoisie does not have to firmly entrench capitalism to create the productive forces to make socialism possible. The proletariat, the working class, the peasants, in collaboration, can work towards socialism even if the bourgeoisie never fully come to power. So very interesting that Trotsky is laying out here that these people basically just robbed their country while still saying that they were patriotic. Something that we also see in our timeline with Trump and his family, bilking the American taxpayer and, scamming his own followers through Trump coin, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So James Wright says he banned Bebo or put him in timeout. I don't know what he did. But shout out to James Wright, our top commissar right now, making sure the chat stays clean. But I want to ask all of you, this is the question for the audience. I welcome discussion here. I'm not here to shut people down, but I want to deal with intelligent people with intelligent thoughts. Why do you think right-wingers are so prone to scamming, to hypocrisy, to lying, to just being misled? Because we're seeing this in our own timeline now, and we're also witnessing this in Trotsky's book. The right-wingers basically took the money and ran off on the plug. Twice. Why? Why does this happen amongst them? You don't see this amongst the left. I guess also generally amongst the left, we don't have money though. We don't have money to be scammed out of. Yeah, I would buy the special edition Marxist shirts, but I'm still doing Uber Eats right now, and I can't really afford the the classes I'm taking at community college. I don't know. I'm sorry. Let me continue here. As regards personnel, the conspiracy was in a bad case, beginning from the very top. General Kornilov, according to the right, Cadet Izgoyev, was the most popular general among the peaceful population, but not among the soldiers, at least not among those in the rear whom I had an opportunity to observe. By peaceful population, Izgoyev means the people of the Nevsky Prospect. To the popular masses, both front and rear, Kornilov was alien, hostile, hateful. The general appointed to command the 3rd Cavalry Corps, Krasnov, a monarchist who soon after tried to become a vassal of Wilhelm II, expressed his surprise that Kornilov conceived such a great undertaking, but himself remained at Mogilev in a palace surrounded by Turkomen and shock troops, as though he did not believe in his own success. To a question from the French journalist Claude Annette, why Kornilov himself did not go to Petrograd at the decisive moments, the chief of the conspiracy answered, I was sick. I had a serious attack of malaria and was not in possession of my usual energy. There were too many of these unfortunate accidents. It is always so when a thing is condemned to failure in advance. The moods of the conspirators oscillated between drunken top loftiness when the ocean only came up to their knees and complete prostration before the first real obstacle. The difficulty was not Kornilov's malaria, but a far deeper, more fatal, and if an incurable disease paralyzing the will of the possessing classes. The cadets, the liberals of Trotsky's time, have seriously denied any counter-revolutionary intentions upon the part of Kornilov, understanding by that the restoration of the Romanov monarchy, as though that were the matter in question. The republicanism of Kornilov did not in the least prevent the monarchist Lukomsky from going hand in hand with him, nor did it prevent the president of the Union of Russian People, the Black Hundreds, Rimsky-Korsakov, from telegraphing Kornilov on the day of the uprising. I heartily pray to God to help you save Russia. I put myself absolutely at your disposal. The Black Hundred partisans of Tsarism would not stop for a cheap little thing like a Republican flag. They understood that Kornilov's program was to be found in himself, in his past, in the Cossack stripes of his trousers, in his connections and sources of financial support, and above all, in his unlimited readiness to cut the throat of the revolution. Designating himself in his manifestos as the son of a peasant, Kornilov based the plan of his uprising wholly upon the Cossacks and the mountaineers. There was not a single infantry detachment among the troops deployed against Petrograd. The general had no access to the Muzhik and did not even try to discover any. There was, at headquarters, to be sure, an agrarian reformer, some sort of professor, who was ready to promise every soldier a fantastic number of desiatins of land, or acres of land. But the manifesto prepared upon this theme was not even issued. The generals were restrained from agrarian demagogism by well-justified dread of frightening and repelling the landlords. Shout out to Young Rich Pseudo. He says, W streamer. Okay, shout out to you, Young Rich, for joining the live stream. But I have a question for you, Young Rich Pseudo, since you're joining this live stream. Do you think we are living in pre-revolutionary times in the West? Do you think that revolution is right around the corner in America or in Western Europe or any of the modern developed countries? As we continue to see our living standards decrease, as we continue to see American empire wage senseless war and brutality across the planet, are we living in times where we will quickly see the disintegration of the capitalist order and the fall of the ruling class of bourgeoisie pedophiles who run our society? Are we approaching that? What do you think, Young Rich Pseudo? Okay, continuing here. A Mogilev peasant, Tadush, who closely observed the environs of the staff in those days, testifies that among the soldiers and in the villages, nobody believed in the manifestos of the general. He wants the power, they said, and not a word about the land and not a word about ending the war. Upon life and death questions, the masses had somehow or other learned to find their way during the 6 months of revolution. Kornilov was offering the people war and a defense of the privileges of generals and the property of landlords. He could give them nothing more, and they expected nothing else from him. In his inability to rely upon the peasant infantry, evident in advance to the conspirators themselves, to say nothing of relying upon the workers, is expressed the socially outcast position of Kornilov's clique. So what Trotsky is trying to argue here is that Kornilov, Kerensky, these people that were trying to plan this coup, it was unsuccessful because they are essentially not trying to meet any of the demands or any of the interest of the people of Russia at the time. At this time, people were primarily concerned with their class interests. They were concerned with the high rents that they paid to their landlords. They were concerned with the poor working conditions in the factories. And all Kerensky and Kornilov can offer are the ideas of nationalism, the state as holy and something that needs to be preserved, etc., etc. So this is a lesson not only for us to critique right-wingers on their ideology, that it's it has no real economic basis to improve the lives of working people, but also for liberals. What was the reason that Kamala and other Democrats, liberal Dems, lost? It was because they were making this appeal to the American people that we need to protect democracy from fascism. We need to save the state, save the FBI, save the CIA, save and protect our police. Shit like that. Absolutely shit that most people in America fucking hate. I'm sure if you did a poll on Americans on the FBI and the CIA and all the other alphabet agencies, a lot of them would have negative public opinion polls results. So this idea of preserving the state is not interesting to people unless they tie it in to something else. That is why white supremacy works, because white supremacy ties itself to the preservation of the state. So a lot of the rednecks in my home state, for example, of Louisiana, realize that the Republicans are probably not going to do something for them. But their economic interest as white people, racialized as white, is tied to the state maintaining its status quo of white supremacy. So that's a very important thing. That's a very important thing for us to keep in mind as we continue to critique our current situation and analyze ways of getting out of it to make a better world. Continuing here. So the picture of political forces traced by the headquarters diplomat, Prince Trubetskoy, was correct in many things, but mistaken in one: of that indifference of the people which made them ready to submit to the least blow of the whip. there was not a trace. On the contrary, the masses were as if only awaiting a blow of the whip in order to show what sources of energy and self-sacrifice were to be found in their depths. This mistake in estimating the mood of the masses brought all their other calculations to the dust. The conspiracy was conducted by those circles which were not accustomed to know how to do anything without the lower ranks, without labor forces, without cannon fodder, without orderlies, servants, clerks, chauffeurs, messengers, cooks, laundresses, switchmen, telegraphers, stablemen, cab drivers. But all these little human bolts and links, unnoticeable, innumerable, necessary, were for the Soviet and against Kornilov. The revolution was omnipresent. It penetrated everywhere, coiling itself around the conspiracy. It had everywhere its eye, its ear, its hand. So what Trotsky is saying is that, these bourgeois people who are trying to, take power once again, they're not going to be successful because the workers are on the Soviet side. And that took a lot of agitation. It took a lot of propaganda. But it also took people realizing the naked truth that the state that Kornilov and Kerensky wants to preserve is not for their own self-interest. I guess arguing for an accelerationist type of point of view. That, things have to get really bad for people to realize that, change is possible or change is necessary. Because that's the Russia that Trotsky is describing here. But I digress. The ideal of military education is that the soldier should act when unseen by the officer exactly as before his eyes. But the Russian soldiers and sailors of 1917, without carrying out official orders, even before the eyes of the commanders, would eagerly catch on the fly the commands of the revolution, or still oftener fulfill them on their own initiative before they arrived. The innumerable servants of the revolution, its agents, its intelligence men, its fighters, had no need either of spurs or of supervision. Formally, the liquidation of the conspiracy was in the hands of the government, and the executive committee cooperated. In reality, the struggle was carried on within totally different channels. While Kerensky, bending under the weight of a more than human responsibility, was measuring the floors of the Winter Palace in solitude, the Committee of Defense, also called the Military Revolutionary Committee, was taking action on a vast scale. Early in the morning, instructions were sent by telegram to the railroad workers and postal and telegraph clerks and soldiers. All movements of troops, so Dan reported on the same day, are to be carried out at the direction of the provisional government when countersigned by the Committee of People's Defense. Qualifications aside, this meant the Committee of Defense deploys the troops under the firm name of provisional government. At the same time, steps were taken for the destruction of Kornilov's nest in Petrograd itself. Searches and arrests were carried out in the military schools and officers' organizations. The hand of the committee was felt everywhere. There was little or no interest in the Governor General. The lower Soviet organizations, in their turn, did not await any summons from above. The principal effort was concentrated in the workers' districts. During the hours of greatest vacillation in the government and of wearisome negotiations between the executive committee and Kerensky, the district Soviets were drawing more closely together and passing resolutions to declare the inter-district conferences continuous, to place their representatives in the staff organized by the executive committee, to form a workers' militia, to establish the control of the district Soviets over the government commissars, to organize flying brigades for the detention of counter-revolutionary agitators. In the total, these revolutions meant an appropriation not only of very considerable governmental functions, but also of the function of the Petrograd Soviet. The logic of the situation compelled the Soviet institutions to draw in their skirts and make room for the lower ranks. The entrance of the Petrograd districts into the arena of the struggle instantly changed both its scope and its direction. Again, the inexhaustible vitality above by the leadership of the compromisers. The Soviets were reborn again from below at the critical moment under pressure from the masses. So what Trotsky is saying here is that it takes continued mass movement, and the workers have to continue to press on for their revolutionary demands to be met. So he's saying here, like, the bourgeoisie, they're pressing down, they're trying to, bring this counter-revolution to fore, and what is happening instead is that the workers are coming together and solidifying their ties and their bonds closer and closer. Very, very impactful and very important for us. To the Bolshevik leaders of the districts, Kornilov's uprising had not been in the least unexpected. They had foreseen and forewarned, and they were the first to appear at their post. At the joint session of the executive committees on August 27th, Sokolnikov announced that the Bolshevik Party had taken all measures available to it in order to inform the people of the danger and prepare for defense. The Bolsheviks announced their readiness to coordinate their military work with the organs of the executive committee. At a night session of the military organization of the Bolsheviks, participated in by delegates of numerous military detachments, it was decided to demand the arrest of all conspirators, to arm the workers, to supply them with soldier instructors, to guarantee the defense of the capital from below, and at the same time to prepare for the creation of a revolutionary government of workers and soldiers. The military organization held meetings throughout the garrison. The soldiers were urged to remain under arms in order to come out at the first alarm. Notwithstanding the fact that they were in a minority, writes Sukhanov, it was quite clear that in the Military Revolutionary Committee, the leadership belonged to the Bolsheviks. He explains this as follows. If the committee wanted to act seriously, it was compelled to act in a revolutionary manner. And for revolutionary action, only the Bolsheviks had genuine resources, for the masses were with them. Intensity in the struggle has everywhere and always brought forth the more active and bolder elements. This automatic section inevitably elevated the Bolsheviks, strengthened their influence, concentrated their initiative in their hands, giving them de facto leadership, even in those organizations where they were in a minority. The nearer you came to the district, to the factory, to the barrack, the more complete and indubitable was the leadership of the Bolsheviks. All the nuclei of the party were on their toes. The big factories organized a system of guard duty by Bolsheviks. In the district committees of the party, representatives of small plants were put on duty. A tie was formed from below, from the shop, leading through the districts to the central committee of the party. Once again, salute to James Wright up in the live stream, making sure all the white supremacists and fascists get kicked out. But what is Trotsky saying here? He is saying that the counter-revolution is coming down. And granted, the counter-revolutionaries, the bourgeois, the monarchists, the capitalists, the crazy officers in the military who want to see the Soviet be crushed, they are incompetent, but yet and still, they do have guns, so they have to be taken seriously. But what Trotsky is saying here is that the Bolsheviks, even though they were in a minority, even though the Bolsheviks were not super popular, they were still highly organized. And I think, once again, this is a lesson for us to take today. It doesn't take a mass amount of people. Yes, we want mass worker action. But when we say mass amounts of people, we're talking about a few million in the American context. But that's never going to be the majority, and that's okay. We should not be afraid to be in the minority. If we are highly organized, principled, and disciplined, we can affect change, and the people will come to our side. New Balance jumped into the stream and said, what are you talking about here today? Please check the description, everybody. I suggest everybody check the description. You can easily click at the top or the below of this video, and you can find out what we are doing in Book React episode 33. Continuing here. Under direct pressure from the Bolsheviks and the organizations led by them, the Committee of Defense recognized the desirability of arming individual groups of workers for the defense of the workers' quarters, the shops and factories. It was only this sanction that the masses lacked. In the districts, according to the workers' press, there immediately appeared whole queues of people eager to join the ranks of the Red Guard. Drilling began in marksmanship and the handling of weapons. Experienced soldiers were brought in as teachers. By the 29th, guards had been formed in almost all the districts. The Red Guard announced its readiness to put in the field a force of 40,000 rifles. The unarmed workers formed companies for trench digging, sheet metal fortification, barbed wire fencing. The new Governor General, Palchinsky, who replaced Savinkov, Kerensky could not keep his accomplice longer than 3 days, was compelled to recognize in a special announcement that when the need arose for the work of sappers in the defense of the capital, thousands of workers, by their irreplaceable personal labor, achieved in the course of a few hours a colossal task without their help would have required several days. This did not prevent Palchinsky, following the example of Savinkov, from suppressing the Bolshevik paper, the sole paper which the workers considered their own. So, once again, Trotsky is saying here that the Bolsheviks were organized, and more importantly, they made sure the workers were armed, something the bourgeoisie couldn't even do. They could barely do that. Okay? And so, yeah, once again, being disciplined, principled, organized, and militant will be our way to salvation, will be our way towards revolutionary action. New Balance says, why was I put on timeout? I just asked a simple question. You were put on timeout because that is a trollish comment. It is trollish to come in here and say, what is this about, when you can easily click the description. We will tolerate no simple-mindedness. We will tolerate no trollish behavior. We will only deal with the text. We will only talk about relevant topics. We will not be doing troll activities in here. And just because I feel like it, you will be put on timeout in the re-education camp again. Continuing here. The giant Kornilov factory became the center of resistance in the Peterhof district. Here, fighting companies were hastily formed. The work of the factory continued day and night. There was a sorting out of new cannon for the formation of proletarian artillery divisions. The worker, Minichev, says, in those days we worked 16 hours a day. We got together about 100 cannon. The newly formed Vikzel received a prompt baptism of war. The railroad workers had a special reason to dread the victory of Kornilov, who had incorporated in his program the inauguration of martial law on the railroads. And here, too, the lower ranks far outdistanced their leaders. The railroad workers tore up and barricaded the tracks in order to hold back Kornilov's army. War experiences came in handy. Measures were also taken to isolate the center of the conspiracy, Mogilev, preventing movements both toward and away from headquarters. The postal and telegraph clerks began to hold up and send to the committee telegrams and orders from headquarters or copies of them. The generals had been accustomed during the years of war to think of transport and communications as technical questions. They found out now that these were political questions. The trade unions, least of all inclined toward political neutrality, did not await any special invitation before occupying military positions. The Railroad Workers Union armed its members and sent them along the lines for inspection and for tearing up railroads, guarding bridges, etc. The workers, in their enthusiasm and resolution, pushed ahead of the more bureaucratic and moderate Vikzel. The Metal Workers Union put its innumerable office workers at their disposal of the Committee of Defense, and also a large sum of money for expenses. The Chauffeurs Union put in charge of the committee its technical and transportation facilities. The Printers Union arranged in a few hours for the issue of Monday's papers, so as to keep the population in touch with events, and at the same time availed themselves of the most effective of all possible means of controlling the press. The rebel general had stamped his feet, and legions rose up from the ground. But they were the legions of the enemy. So Trotsky is, laying out the game plan here. For workers to be effective, for workers to get their way, there has to be mass collective action across different industries. There is some disputes among trade unionists Should only certain specialties be involved in the revolution, or should we create one big union for mass worker movement? I believe this was the original divide between the IWW, which was the International Workers of the World or something like that, and the AFL and the CIO. The AFL and the CIO were more centrist or right-wing, depending how you frame it, that, individual workers should be sectioned off in their unions, and if railroad conductors are going on strike, that has nothing to do with teachers. But I would argue that in the Russian Revolution, the way the workers were successful were the chauffeurs going on strike, also at the same time as the telegraph operators and stuff like that. So it takes one big union. It takes collective worker action, because we're all in the proletariat. I don't believe in the vivisection or dissection of the working class. The working class should all be in one big union, so that when we do need to press that button for mass mobilization to bring the capitalist class to their knees when they go against working class interests, that we're able to push that button. And it's not just, the teachers are on strike, but the doctors aren't. No, everybody, we ain't going to work today. Everybody, we are making our demands heard. And an attack on one of us is an attack on all. So I do think that's a game that we should pick up from what Trotsky is saying here, but I digress. All around Petrograd, in the neighboring garrisons, in the great railroad stations, in the fleet, work was going on night and day. They were inspecting their own ranks, arming the workers, sending out detachments as patrols along the tracks, establishing communications with neighboring points and with Smolny. The task of the Committee of Defense was not so much to keep watch over and summon the workers, as merely to register and direct them. Its plans were always anticipated. The defense against the rebellion of the generals turned into a popular roundup of the conspirators. In Helsingfors, a general congress of all the Soviet organizations created a revolutionary committee, which sent its commissars to the offices of the governor general, the commandant, the intelligence service, and other important institutions. Thenceforth, no order was valid without its signature. The telegraphs and telephones were taken under control. The official representatives of Cossack regiment quartered in Helsingfors, chiefly officers, tried to declare themselves neutral. They were secret Kornilovists. On the second day, a rank-and-file Cossack appeared before the committee with the announcement that the whole regiment was against Kornilov. Cossack representatives were for the first time introduced into the Soviet. In this case, as in others, a sharp conflict of classes was pushing the officers to the right and the rank and file to the left. The Kronstadt Soviet, which had completely recovered from the July wounds, sent a telegraph declaration. The Kronstadt garrison is ready, as one man at the first word from the executive committee, to come to the defense of the revolution. The Kronstadters did not know in those days to what extent the defense of the revolution meant the defense of themselves against annihilation. At that time, they could still only guess this. Soon after the July days, it had been decided by the provisional government to vacate the Kronstadt fortress as a nest of Bolshevism. This measure, adopted in agreement with Kornilov, was officially explained as due to strategic motives. Sensing some dirty work, the sailors had resisted. The legend of treachery at headquarters, wrote Kerensky after he himself had accused Kornilov of treachery, was so deeply rooted in Kronstadt that every attempt to remove the artillery evoked actual ferocity from the crowd there. The task of devising a way to liquidate Kronstadt was laid by the government upon Kornilov. Kornilov devised a way. Immediately after the conquest of the city, Krymov was to dispatch a brigade with artillery to Oranienbaum and, under threat of bombardment from the shores, demand that the Kronstadt garrison disarm the fortress and transfer themselves to the mainland, where the sailors were to undergo mass executions. But while Krymov was entering upon his task of saving the government found itself obliged to ask the Kronstadters to save it from Krymov. So once again, the brutality of the counter-revolutionaries, the brutality of the bourgeois is driving people away from them. And I think To some degree, we are seeing this now, though it doesn't matter. And one of the things that bothers me the most about liberal media, even it affects my, very left-wing feed, is that you see every now and then a video pop up or a news article pop up and say, Latinos for Trump are now abandoning Trump. Or, young Gen Z men who were formerly right-wing are now turning liberal. Like, I hate that shit because it doesn't matter at this point. We're living in full-on fascism. Like, the end of the world is here. You get what I'm saying? But it is sort of true that when we see the brutality of ICE, when we see the brutality of the Trump administration in bombing a school in Iran, or continuing the genocide in Gaza, or allowing, Israel to continue to wage a unholy war against Lebanon, or, us threatening, the millions of people in Cuba with starvation, you know what I'm saying? Or the domestic policy in America where police are given immunity for killing people. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, that's going to drive some people away from the right, which is going to a theme starting from this live stream, an accelerationist point of view. The worse things get, especially with right-wing control, the more people probably, most likely will come over to our side as what is laid bare becomes undeniable. So I don't mean to be an accelerationist because I'm not one of those guys that says, okay, let's all vote en masse for Republicans to just burn the whole country down and then we'll have, the Soviets, like something new will be burned from the ashes. This is not guaranteed. There are many other factors that are important, such as being mobilized, organized, principled, disciplined, armed. You get what I'm saying? Having good propaganda as well. There are many other factors to have the successful revolution. But that's just something that I'm thinking about. You know what I'm saying? Like, the right wing will drive, the right wing will be unsuccessful because their policies will become naked and bare and prove to be ineffective in actually bringing peace, prosperity, and happiness to people. So that's something we should look forward to and exploit as leftists. But let's continue here. The executive committee sent telephonograms. What's a telephonogram? That's some old technology, boy. Anyway, the executive committee sent telephonograms to Kronstadt and Viborg, asking for the dispatch of considerable detachments of troops to Petrograd. On the morning of the 29th, the troops began to arrive. These were chiefly Bolshevik units. In order that the summons of the executive committee should become operative, it had to be confirmed by the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks. A little earlier, at midday of the 28th, upon an order from Kerensky, which sounded very much like a humble request, sailors from the cruiser Aurora had undertaken the defense of the Winter Palace. A part of the same crew were still imprisoned in Kresty for participation in the July demonstration. During their hours off duty, the sailors came to the prison for a visit with the imprisoned Kronstadters and with Trotsky, Raskolnikov, and others. "Isn't it time to arrest the government?" asked the visitors. "No, not yet," was the answer. "Use Kerensky as a gun rest to shoot Kornilov. Afterward, we will settle with Kerensky." In June and July, these sailors had not been inclined to pay much attention to revolutionary strategy, but they had learned much in a short 2 months. They raised the question of the arrest of the government rather to test themselves and clear their own consciences. They themselves were beginning to grasp the inexorable consecutiveness of events. In the first half of July, beaten, condemned, slandered. At the end of August, the trusted defenders of the Winter Palace against Kornilovists. At the end of October, they will be shooting at the Winter Palace with the guns of the Aurora. Poetic. But although the same time, a general settlement with the February regime, they did not want to endure for one unnecessary day the Kornilovist officers hanging over their heads. The commanding staff, which had been imposed upon them by the government since the July days, was almost solidly on the side of the conspirators. The Kronstadt Soviet immediately removed the government commander of the fortress and installed their own. The compromisers had now ceased to shout about the secession of the Kronstadt Republic. However, the thing did not everywhere stop at mere removals from office. It came to bloody encounters in several places. It began in Viborg, says Sukhanov, with the beating to death of generals and officers by a soldier-sailor crowd infuriated and panic-stricken. No, these crowds were not infuriated, and it would not be possible to speak in this instance of panic. On the morning of the 29th, Central Flot sent a telegram to the commandant at Vyborg, General Aronovsky, for communication to the garrison, informing them of the mutiny at headquarters. The commandant held up the telegram for a whole day, and to question about what was happening, answered that he had received no information. In the course of a search instituted by the sailors, the telegram was found. Thus caught in the act, the general declared himself a partisan of Kornilov. The sailors shot the commandant, and along with him, 2 other officers who had declared themselves of the same party. From the offices of the Baltic Fleet, the sailors required a signed declaration of loyalty to the revolution, and when 4 officers of the ship of the line Petropavlovsk refused to sign, declaring themselves Kornilovists, they were, by resolution of the crew, immediately shot. So once again, I had this discussion last night with my friend who is a Trotskyist. And one of the reasons he's not a Trotskyist is he believes that the Stalinist regime that came into power after Lenin was too repressive and too authoritarian. But counter-revolutions have to be put down. The remnants of bourgeois thinking or the remnants of bourgeois interest have to be suppressed. In America, for example, in my home state of Louisiana, as well as in Texas, you cannot run as a politician as an open communist. Nobody is saying that America is undemocratic because they ban whole political parties. Meanwhile, you could be an open white supremacist, a Nazi, a fascist, and run like David Duke in my home state, who won Ouachita Parish, my parish, which is another word for county. So yeah, America is unfair, and America wants to fight against its own revolutionary forces within it. The same way, in a socialist state, you have to put down and suppress counter-revolutionary forces by our estimate. And I brought that up because what we saw here is that the soldiers and the sailors and the police, by extension, are willing to fight against the counter-revolutionary forces against their liberation, even if blood must be shed, which is something that we should take into account. Continuing here, a mortal danger was hanging over the soldiers and sailors. A bloody purgation, not only of Petrograd and Kronstadt, but of all the garrisons of the country, was impending. From the conduct of their suddenly emboldened officers, from their tones, their side glances, the soldiers and sailors could plainly foresee their own fate in case of a victory of headquarters. In those localities where the atmosphere was especially hot, they hastened to cut off the road of the enemy, forestalling the purgation intended by the officers with their own sailors and soldiers' purgation. Civil war, as is well known, has its laws, and they have never been considered identical with the laws of humane contact. I mean, I wish I was able to bring up that line to my friend last night, because that's so real. I mean, when it comes to war, when it comes to state building, there are things that have to happen in war, state building, state preservation, that we would say are inhumane. This is why I'm not a prison abolitionist. This is why I don't consider myself an abolitionist. I consider myself a revolutionary. And I consider those who tend to be of that persuasion of prison abolition or other forms of abolitionism in modern leftist discourse tend to be, in my view, revisionist. And our what we should strive for is to be revolutionary, not abolitionist. We don't want to abolish police because we need police to put down the capitalist pigs. We will need soldiers to put down the bourgeoisie and their remnants. We will need, prisons to make sure that certain people will not be able to be in society to do horrible things to us. Okay? So very, very important for us to consider that. Us communists should not be considering ourselves abolitionists. And Trotsky lays it very clear with this sentence. Civil war, as is well known, has its laws, and they have never been considered identical with the laws of humane conduct. And while us communists consider ourselves more humane, we should not say that we are, putting our bayonets in the ground, to quote Trotsky from earlier. Anyway, continuing here, Trotsky says, Chelsea immediately sent a telegram to Vyborg and Helsingfors condemning lynch law as a mortal blow against the revolution. Kerensky, on his part, telegraphed to Helsingfors, "I demand an immediate end of disgusting acts of violence. If you seek the political responsibility for these individual cases of lynch law, not forgetting that revolution as a whole is taking to the law into one's own hands. In the given case, the responsibility rests wholly on the government and the compromisers, who at a moment of danger would run for help to the revolutionary masses, in order afterward to turn them over again to the counter-revolutionary officers." As during the state conference in Moscow, when he was expecting an uprising from moment to moment, so now after the break with headquarters, Kerensky turned to the Bolsheviks with a request to influence the soldiers to come to the defense of the revolution. In summoning the Bolshevik sailors to the defense of the Winter Palace, however, Kerensky did not set free their comrades, the July prisoners. Sukhanov writes on this theme. The situation with Alexeyev whispering to Kerensky and Trotsky in prison was absolutely intolerable. It is not hard to imagine the excitement which prevailed in the crowded prisons. "We were boiling with indignation," relates midshipman Raskolnikov, "against the provisional government, which in such days of alarm continued to let revolutionists like Trotsky rot in Kresty. What cowards they are," said Trotsky, as some of us were circling around together on our walk. "They ought immediately to declare Kornilov an outlaw, so that any soldier devoted to the revolution might feel that he had a right to put an end to him." Is Trotsky arguing that assassination is, a legitimate revolutionary tactic? What do you think about that? That's for the audience. Is Trotsky arguing here that assassination is a understandable revolutionary tactic? I don't know. Continuing here, the entrance of Kornilov's troops into Petrograd would have meant, first of all, the extermination of the arrested Bolsheviks. In his order to General Bagration, who was to enter the capital with the vanguard, Krymov did not forget this special command: place a guard in prison and houses of detention. In no case let out the people now under restraint. This was a concerted program, inspired by Milikov ever since the April days. In no case let them out. There was not a single meeting in Petrograd in those days which did not pass resolutions demanding the release of the July prisoners. Delegation after delegation came to the executive committee, which in turn sent its leaders for negotiations to the Winter Palace. In vain. The stubbornness of Kerensky on this question is the more remarkable, since during the first day and a half or two, he considered the position of the government hopeless and was therefore condemning himself to the role of the old-time jailkeeper, holding the Bolsheviks so that the generals could hang them. It is no wonder that the masses, led by the Bolsheviks, in fighting against Kornilov, did not place a moment of trust in Kerensky. For them, it was not a case of defending the government, but of defending the revolution. So much the more resolute and devoted was their struggle. The resistance to the rebels grew out of the very road beds, out of stones, out of the air. The railroad workers of the Luga station, where Krymov arrived, stubbornly refused to move the troop trains, alluding to a lack of locomotives. The Cossack echelons also found themselves immediately surrounded by armed soldiers from the Luga garrison, 20,000 strong. There was no military encounter, but there was something far more dangerous: contact, social exchange, interpenetration. Pause, no diddy. The Luga Soviet had time to print the government announcement retiring Kornilov, and this document was now widely distributed among the echelons. The officers tried to persuade the Cossacks not to believe the agitators, but this very necessity of persuasion was a bad sign. On receiving Kornilov's order to advance, Krymov demanded, under threat of bayonets, that the locomotives be ready in half an hour. The threat seemed effective. The locomotives, although with some delays, were supplied, but even so it was impossible to move, since the road out was damaged and so crowded with cars that it would take a good 24 hours to clear it. To get free of demoralizing propaganda, Krymov, on the evening of the 28th, removed his troops several versts from Luga. but the agitators immediately turned up in the villages. These were soldiers, workers, railroad men. There was no refuge from them. They went everywhere. The Cossacks began even to hold meetings. Thus stormed with propaganda and cursing his impotence, Krymov waited in vain for Bagration. The railroad workers were holding up the echelon of the savage division, which also in the coming hours was to undergo a most alarming moral attack. So what Trotsky is laying out here is that the counter-revolution is finding it hard to move their troops. Why? Because people went on strike. There was a mass movement, and the train operators are not even moving the cars that are supposed to carry the savage division and these Cossack soldiers that are trying to be sent to Petrograd and Vyborg to, basically kill the workers, kill the peasants. So that's a wonderful thing right here. And while we live now in the 21st century where transportation is more mobile and atomized, individuals can hop in cars, there's still ways for us as workers to collaborate to make that harder for them to be moving around from place to place. It's still very possible. And also, I do believe that Trotsky is making a point here that the working class did not just look at the Cossacks and these soldiers who are the strong arm of the bourgeoisie as pure enemies. They didn't look at them and say, all of y'all are bastards. They handed them leaflets. They handed them pamphlets. They called them out. They challenged them ideologically, showing that us communists should be trying to propagandize to soldiers. We should be continually trying to propagandize to the people that comprise the armed wing of the state, the enforcers of the state. Okay, continuing here. No matter how spineless and even cowardly the compromisist democracy was in itself, those mass forces upon which it again partly relied in its struggle against Kornilov opened before its inexhaustible resources for action. The social revolutionaries and Mensheviks did not see it as their task to conquer the forces of Kornilov in open struggle, but to bring the forces over to their own side. That was right. Against compromisism, along that line, it goes without saying that the Bolsheviks had no objection. On the contrary, that was their own fundamental method. The Bolsheviks only demanded that behind the agitators and parliamentaries, armed workers and soldiers should stand ready. For this moral mode of action upon the Kornilov regiments, an unlimited choice of ways and means was suddenly discovered. Thus, a Muslim delegation was sent to meet the savage division on the staff, of which was included native protenants, who had immediately made themselves known, beginning with the grandson of the famous Shamil, who heroically defended the Caucasus against Tsarism. The mountaineers would not permit their officers to arrest the delegation. That was a violation of the ancient customs of hospitality. Negotiations were opened and soon became the beginning of the end. The Kornilov commanders, in order to explain the whole campaign, had kept referring to a rebellion of German agents supposed to have begun in Petrograd. The delegates, arriving directly from the capital, not only disproved the fact of a rebellion, but also demonstrated with documents in their hands that Krymov was a rebel and was leading his troops against the government. What could the officers of Kornilov reply to that? So once again, I know I said once again, even though I never mentioned this before. Pardon, that's my flaw. But I've never mentioned this. But this is Trotsky talking about identity politics. Now, identity politics, or IDPOL for short, has a dirty name now in our political lexicon. But identity politics essentially says that people's identity matters when they're doing politics. How you identify your religion, your gender, your racialization, etc. matters in your political interests or expressing your political interests. And so what Trotsky is saying here is that the counter-revolution is full of Muslims, essentially. The counter-revolution is recruiting these guys who are from the Muslim parts of the Russian Empire to come in and crush the workers' Soviet. And so what do the Soviets do? They send their own Muslims to go and talk to these Muslim guys. The Muslim guys who are the soldiers of the reactionaries have been told, hey, I heard that you guys are German spies. You're here to destabilize Russia. And the other guys reply, Salam alaikum, my brother. Do we look like we're German spies? Do you think we would fight on behalf of Germany? We're just like you. We come from where you come from. And I think this is vitally important for us leftists today. to have a successful revolution, it will take all of us, and especially for our propaganda, we have to have all types and stripes of people. We need black men. We need black women. We need white men. We need white women. We need Latin people, Asian people, all types of people. Cisgendered, heterosexual, gay, non-binary, all types of people to propagandize to different groups. So this is why it's vitally important for us to organize and be in solidarity. I know this is preaching to the choir because most leftists are anti-racist, they're anti-gender discrimination, anti-homophobia. But also, I do believe that in some leftist circles, there is some broad discrimination against religion. You know what I'm saying? In some of my leftist circles, I'm scared to tell them I'm Muslim because, number one, we're having our leftist chats over beer and wine. And so then that opens up a door for a conversation I don't want to have. But in general, there is a lot of anti-religiousness amongst the left. And I do think it will take us incorporating communist Christians, communist Muslims, communist Jews, and other people of different religious stripes to talk to different religious groups to dispel these myths and notions people have in their head that the communists are anti-God. We are not anti-God. We are not anti-religion. We are not anti-people practicing an individual faith because religion will have a place in a socialist state. Somebody is still going to abuse their wife. Somebody still is going to be sad when grandma dies. Somebody is still going to have questions about our origins and the nature of the universe. And for some people, God fills that void. Like it does for me. I believe in God. And I also am a communist. I'm a non-practicing Muslim communist. Okay? That's something that I do think is an advantage for the movement. And I think, I was going to go off on this diatribe and specifically talk about Islamophobia amongst the left, but I think it's broader than just Islamophobia. And in fact, I think the Islamophobia amongst the left is probably more narrow because we understand that Islamophobia is just misplaced racism it's just right-wing propaganda that has been implanted in the minds of Islamophobes. But rather, broadly amongst the left, there is a lot of anti-religiousness. And that needs to be dispelled because we will need our comrades of different religious denominations to propagandize too. So that's all I had to say. Let's continue here. On the staff car of the Savage Division, the soldiers stuck up a red flag with the inscription, "Land and Freedom." The staff commander ordered them to take down the flag, merely to avoid confusing it with a railroad signal, as the lieutenant colonel politely explained. The staff soldiers were not satisfied with this cowardly explanation and arrested the lieutenant colonel. Were they not mistaken at headquarters when they said that the Caucasian mountaineers did not care whom they slaughtered? Very interesting. Once again, it's funny to me that Trotsky is writing Caucasians as like a byline for Muslim. You know what I mean? Because in my mind, Caucasian means white. It means white. But in the Russian context, when you speak of the Caucasus, people actually from the Caucasian region, these are big-bearded, blue-eyed, Salam alaikum, Allahu Akbar brothers. And those are my brothers in Islam. So shout out to them. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, I continue here. So the next morning, a colonel arrived at Krymov's headquarters from Kornilov, with an order to concentrate his corps, advance swiftly on Petrograd, and unexpectedly occupy it. At headquarters, they were obviously still trying to shut their eyes to the facts. Krymov replied that the different units of the corps were scattered on various railroads and in some places were detaining, that he had at his disposition only 8 Cossack squadrons, that the railroads were damaged, overloaded, barricaded, and that it was possible to move farther only on foot, and that finally there could be no talk of an unexpected occupation of Petrograd. Now that the workers and soldiers have been placed under arms in the capital and its environs, the affair was still further complicated by the fact that the possibility was hopelessly past of carrying out the operation unexpectedly, even to the troops of Krymov himself. Sensing something unpropitious, they had demanded explanations. It had become necessary to inform them of the conflict between Kornilov and Kerensky. That is, to place soldiers' meetings officially on the order of the day. An order issued by Krymov at just that moment read, "This evening, I received from the headquarters of the Commander-in-Chief and from Petrograd information that rebellions have begun in Petrograd. This deceit was designed to justify an already quite open campaign against the government." An order of Kornilov himself on the 29th of August had read, "The intelligence service from Holland reports, A, in a few days a simultaneous attack upon the whole front is to begin with the aim of routing and putting to flight our disintegrating army. B, an insurrection is under preparation in Finland. C, explosions are to be expected of bridges on the Dnieper and the Volga. And D, an insurrection of Bolsheviks is being organized in Petrograd." This was the same information to which Savinkov had already referred on the 23rd. Holland is mentioned here merely to distract attention. According to all evidence, the document was fabricated in the French war mission or with its participation. Kerensky on the same day telegraphed Krymov, "There is complete tranquility in Petrograd. No demonstrations are expected. Your corps is not needed." The demonstrations were to have been evoked by the military edicts of Kerensky himself. Since it had been necessary to postpone his governmental act of provocation, Kerensky was entirely justified in concluding that no demonstrations are expected. Seeing no way out, Krymov made an awkward attempt to advance upon Petrograd with his 8 Cossack squadrons. This was little but a gesture to clear his own conscience, and nothing, of course, came of it. Meeting a force on patrol duty a few versts from Luga, Krymov turned back without even trying to give battle. On the theme of this single and completely fictitious operation, Krasnov, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Corps, wrote later, "We should have struck Petrograd with a force of 8 6 cavalry and Cossack squadrons, and we struck with 1 brigade and 8 weak squadrons, half of them without officers. Instead of striking with our fist, we struck with our little finger. It painted the finger, and those we struck at were insensible of the blow. In the essence of the matter, there was no blow, even from a finger. Nobody felt any pain at all." Just like right-wingers. They think they put it in, and the reply is it in yet? I don't feel anything. A typical day for them. Continuing. The railroad workers in those days did their duty. In a mysterious way, echelons would find themselves moving on the wrong roads. Regiments would arrive in the wrong division. Artillery would be sent up a blind alley. Staffs would get out of communication with their units. All the big stations had their own Soviets, their railroad workers, and their military committees. The telegraphers kept them informed of all events, all movements, all changes. The telegraphers also held up the orders of Kornilov. Information unfavorable to the Kornilovist were immediately multiplied, distributed, pasted up, passed from mouth to mouth. The machinist, the switchmen, the oilers became agitators. It was in this atmosphere that the Kornilov echelons advanced, or what was worse, stood still. The commanding staff, soon sensing the hopelessness of the situation, obviously did not hasten to move forward, and with their passively promoted the work of the counter-conspirators of the transport system. Parts of the army of Krymov were in this way scattered about in the stations, sidings, and branch lines of 8 different railroads. If you follow on the map the fate of the Kornilov echelons, you get the impression that the conspirators were playing at blind man's bluff on the railroad lines. Almost everywhere, says General Krasnov, writing his observations made on the night of August 30th, we saw one and the same picture, on the tracks or in the cars, or in the saddles of their black or bay or hay horses. Is that hay horses or bay horses? What is a bay horse? Anyway, continuing here. Almost everywhere, says General Krasnov, writing his observations made on the nights of August 30th, we saw one and the same picture, on the tracks or in the cars, or in the saddles of their black or bay horses, who would turn from time to time to gaze at them. Dragoons would be sitting or standing, and in the midst of them some lively personality in a soldier's long coat. The name of this lively personality soon became Legion. From the direction of Petrograd, innumerable delegations continued to arrive from regiments sent out to oppose the Kornilovists. Before fighting, they wanted to talk things over. The revolutionary troops were confidently hopeful that the thing could be settled without fighting. This hope was confirmed. The Cossacks readily came to meet them. The communication squad of the Corps would seize locomotives and send the delegates along all railroad lines. The situation would be explained to every echelon. Meetings were continuous, and at them all the cry was being raised: they have deceived us. So if that doesn't clearly, and I'm sorry for clapping my hands like a bad bitch, I'm sorry, but if that doesn't clearly show that we should be propagandizing to the soldiers and police, I don't know what will. This is I'm taking a lot from Trotsky's book, but one of the main talking points I'm taking from this is that propaganda towards the police and soldiers should never be abandoned by socialists and communists. Literally, the bourgeois is sending out their hardline fighters. They're sending out their death squads. Literally, a right-wing death squad is at the door of the Petrograd Soviet. And what do the Bolsheviks do? They don't just point guns at them. They don't just yell back, all cops are bastards, all soldiers are baby killers. They don't do that. They say, let's go talk with them. Let's go talk with them. And as soon as the left-wingers, as soon as the Bolsheviks, the workers, the Soviets, the soldiers already in the Soviets, talk to the right-wing death squad, the right-wingers say, we've been deceived. We've been lied to. And it wasn't just instantly. They didn't just instantly get it. It was months of propaganda. And it was also months of seeing how their officers will betray them. But it's very, very important for us as leftists to not abandon any aspect of the working class. And that includes the baby killers and the bastards and the police. I'm sorry. We should not abandon propagandizing to soldiers and police, because those are working class people too, and many of them have just been misled. They've just been misled and misinformed. Okay? So vitally important. Vitally important. Because that's a very powerful story that he is laying out there. And also, as for people that are a part of the military, because I don't know where my voice is going. Who knows who's listening right now? But to the people in the military, in the American military or any other military out there, fighting on behalf of bourgeois states is counter-revolutionary. And if you are just now gaining class consciousness or awakening to the evils of empire, you should be trying to make common cause with the people who are your enemy. And I know that sounds very radical, especially if you're on the front lines and people are shooting at you and you're supposed to shoot back. I get what you're saying. But going and referencing a conversation I had last night about Ukraine with my Trotskyist friend and my Stalinist friend, the conclusion that I came to from that conversation is that supporting Ukraine or supporting Russia is nil. We are supposed to support the working class. And so, a Ukrainian dying and fighting for the glory of Russia or the sovereign, a Ukrainian fighting and dying for the sovereignty of Ukraine, or a Russian fighting and dying to denazify Ukraine or for the glory of Russia are both deluded. They are both deluded and misled. And our common cause as communists, as socialists, is to inform both of them, both of those working class gentlemen who have on different uniforms, that their interest is fighting against their respective leaders and their capitalist class. Because the defense of Ukraine is a bourgeois war, and the colonial conquest of Russia is a bourgeois war, where both of the working class people in the country will see no benefit. Okay? I'm sorry if I'm extrapolating just from this paragraph so much, but there is a lot to break down here. But I digress. What do you think? We have a very educated audience here. I will also see these comments later if you're going to watch this in the playback. What do you think? What do you think? Because what I think, the conclusion I've arrived to when it comes to Ukraine, and also when it comes to propagandizing to police, is the truest of, and the most correct of Marxist positions, or Marxist-Leninist positions in revolutionary politics. But tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong, or tell me if you agree. I don't know. All right. So, continuing here. Not only the chiefs of divisions, says Krasnov, but even the commanders of regiments did not know exactly where their squadrons and companies were. The absence of food and forage naturally irritated everybody still more. The men, seeing all this meaningless confusion which had been created around them, began to arrest their chiefs and officers. A delegation from the Soviet, which had organized in its own headquarters, reported, "Fraternization is going on rapidly. We are fully confident that the conflict may be considered liquidated. Delegations are coming from all sides. Committees took the place of the officers in directing the units. A Soviet of deputies of the Corps was very soon created, and from its staff a delegation of 40 men was appointed to go over to the provisional government. The Cossacks began to announce out loud that they were only waiting an order from Petrograd to arrest Krymov and the other officers." So once again, it's very poetic, a type of poetic justice for Trotsky to say here that these people who are part of this right-wing death squad that was going to come out here and just bash the Bolsheviks end up saying, "So you want us to arrest our officers? Hey, you want us to kill the guy that came out here to send us here to kill you? You want us to do that?" So yeah, very, very interesting. John Cassiano says, "Hi." Okay, no hi. You don't have to announce yourself. Relate to the questions at hand. And so, John Cassiano, I pose a question to you. Should us socialists, communists, leftists in general, propagandize to police? Here, a basic question. I'll throw one out to you. Don't just come in here and say hi. This isn't a chatting circle just to shoot the shit. We're here to talk about a text, here to talk about ideas, here to theorize, and also here to weed out the white supremacists and fascists that continue to flood my channel. So, John Cassiano, I ask you a direct question. Should we propagandize to police the same way we would propagandize to other aspects of the working class or other facets of the working class? So, continuing, Stankovic paints a picture of what he found on the road when he set out on the 30th with Voitinsky in the direction of Pskov. In Petrograd, he says, they had thought Sarko was occupied by Kornilovists. There was nobody there at all. In Gatchina, nobody. On the road to Luga, nobody. In Luga, peace and quiet. We arrived at the village where the staff of the Corps was supposed to be located. Empty. We learned that early in the morning, the Cossacks had left their positions and gone away in the direction opposite to Petrograd. The insurrection had rolled back, crumbled to pieces, been sucked up by the earth. But in the Winter Palace, they were still dreading the enemy. Kerensky made an attempt to enter into conversation with the commanding staff of the rebels. That course seemed to him more hopeful than the anarchist initiative of the lower ranks. He sent delegates to Krymov and, in the name of the salvation of Russia, invited him to come to Petrograd, guaranteeing him safety on his word of honor. Pressed upon all sides, and having completely lost his head, the general hastened, of course, to accept the invitation. On his heels came a deputation from the Cossacks. The fronts did not support headquarters. Only the Southwestern made a somewhat serious attempt. Denikin's staff had adopted preparatory measures and good reason. The unreliable guards at the staff were replaced by Cossacks. The printing presses were seized on the night of the 27th. The staff tried to play the role of self-confident master of the situation and even forbade the committee of the front to use the telegraph. But the illusion did not last more than a few hours. Delegates from various units began to come to the committee with offers of support. Armored cars appeared, machine guns, field artillery. The committee immediately asserted its control of the activity of the staff, leaving it the initiative only in operations against the enemy. By 3 o'clock on the 28th, the power of the Southwestern Front was wholly in the hands of the committee. Never again, wept Denikin, did the future of the country seem so dark, our impotence so grievous and humiliating. Okay? So, all right. So, Highlight says, I think that the monopoly over energy is the cause of the war. This is not the question, Highlight. We are not asking the question, what is the cause of the Russian-Ukrainian war currently waging and has been waging since 2021? When did that shit even begin? 2022? It's been so long. Can you believe the Ukraine war has been going on so long? It came out before the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war happened before ChatGPT came out. That's crazy to think about, man. As far as I remember, if I remember right. Anyway, the question is not why the Ukrainian and Russian war happened. The the question is, what is our stance as leftists in pertaining to the war? I believe that we are past saying that we are supporting Ukraine if the argument is it's an anti-colonial struggle, which arguably is just a graft and a grift for the Ukrainian ruling class to, funnel money into their own pockets through the billions of dollars that America and other Western countries are flooding in. How Zelensky can stay in power and guarantee his own safety and the clique that he has built around him. And also for the weapons manufacturers and the military-industrial complex of the United States to continue to line its pockets because we give billions to Ukraine so that they can buy our weapons. And it's obvious that, the Russian ruling elite will see financial benefit from an annexed Ukraine. So, of course, both sides are waging a war, in my opinion, for the benefits of their own ruling clique. It's a bourgeois war between two bourgeois forces. So we should oppose this war the same way we should have opposed World War I if we were around that time. Working class people shouldn't be fighting on behalf of kings and empires and a ruling clique. Okay? All right? And so Highlight says, I think we should support the working class of both Russia and Ukraine against their own oligarch leaders. I agree with that. So we're on the same page. We're on the same page. So I think we're on the same page. So there's nothing more there. But still, thank you, Highlight, for answering the question. If I'm tough on y'all out here, it's because I want us to stay on track. We are here to bring order. We want people to know once we establish communism and socialism, it's not anarchy. There will be order. There will be more freedom in a socialist state, but there will be order, okay? And that's what I'm trying to replicate here, all right? That we will talk about the topic and stay on hand. So Highlight, another question for you, since you're tuned in and tuned up. Are we living through pre-revolutionary times in the West? In Western countries, we are seeing the living standards continue to go down and American empire continue to become more erratic and bloodthirsty. Are we living through times where, right around the corner, we might have Soviet America? Or where we will see our capitalist class get their comeuppance? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Highlights. Are we living through pre-revolutionary times? Continuing here. On the other fronts, the thing passed off less dramatically. The commander-in-chief had only to look around in order to sense a torrent of friendly feeling going out to the commissars of the provisional government. By the morning of the 29th, the telegrams had arrived at the Winter Palace, which, with expressions of loyalty from General Shcherbachev on the Romanian front, Valuyev on the Western, and Przewalski on the Caucasian. On the northern front, where the commander-in-chief was an open Kornilovist, Klembovsky Stankovich named a certain Savitsky as his deputy. Savitsky, little known to anybody until then, and appointed by telegram at the moment of the conflict, writes Stankovich himself, could appeal with confidence to any bunch of soldiers, infantry, Cossacks, orderlies, and even Junkers, with any order whatever, even if it were a question of arresting the commander-in-chief, and the order would be promptly carried out. Klembovsky was replaced, without further difficulties, by General Bonch Bruvich, who, through the mediation of his brother, a well-known Bolshevik, became afterward one of the first to enter the service of the Bolshevik government. Going to the comments here, Highlight says, I think the West is more likely to enter into right-wing radicalization and that poorer countries are more prone to socialist revolution. I mean, that has been what we have seen historically, because in the West, in the most economically developed countries, essentially America has been very right-wing post-World War II. You know what I mean? We waged imperial wars in Korea and Vietnam and doused the people of Cambodia and Vietnam with napalm. So America and the West generally has been bent towards right-wing extremism. And now what we're seeing, that neoliberalism can no longer make that right-wing tendency within Western nations hidden. It cannot make it invisible. It's becoming more naked and out in the open. As neoliberalism demanded cheap labor from abroad and also domestically Foreign workers are moving into places like Belfast, for example, to take advantage of the jobs, and also the shrinking population of these Western nations because the people there cannot afford to have children to maintain a certain lifestyle. So as neoliberalism depended upon people of the global South to maintain white supremacy and capitalist functions that maintain what we imagine to be our status quo of the world, we are now seeing the reaction to this neoliberal policy. And because the left is failing to address these issues and propagandize to these people to explain to them why it's so fucked up that you can't afford shit, your kids probably won't be able to afford shit, and all your neighbors are now black, Muslim, Latino, and don't speak your native language, or their kids are mixing with your kids, and now little half-breeds are running around the country. All this shit that seems unexplainable to you. You can't fathom how the white man went from a century ago being the rulers of the world with vast empires and the strongest economies to now y'all are, begging for money from other countries, just juggling money from the IMF and other major institutions. You can't understand why shit is so fucked up. The left is not answering that. So yes, we are seeing right-wing reactionaryism. But I do think that right-wing reactionaryism will just be a trend. It will just be a trend. And I do think many people are becoming more radicalized and waking up, and thus doing the work that it takes to propagandize to the masses to raise their class consciousness and to create class solidarity, to then have the mass workers movement. Okay? So I do think that yes, some right-winger might be elected, like a Trump, or like a Nigel Farage, or a Marine Le Pen. Yes, I do think that is around the corner. And shit is going to get really nasty. Shit is going to get really nasty. But it's been nasty for us in the global South. Hence, going to why you said highlight the global South. In poorer countries that be more prone to socialism. Yes, I do think that will happen. But it's been fucked up. Okay, so we've been dealing with that. That's not the issue. The issue is, how will the left take advantage of the opportunity to have masses of people witness in their own lifetime degrading living conditions in the West, and answer them with the right answers, that it's economics, that is the billionaire, pedophile, Epstein class, to say it in simpler terms, because I guess bourgeois capitalist is just too advanced for them. The billionaire, pedophile, Epstein class have made you poorer. The billionaire, pedophile, Epstein class got you working for Uber Eats at night and your day job. The pedophile Epstein class is the reason why you can't take your kids to Disneyland. The pedophile, billionaire, Epstein class is the reason why you got Muslims and black people living all over your pure white European homeland, okay? And American empire as well, okay? So if you want to live in white utopia, be a communist. If you want all the brown people gone, we'll go back to our countries if y'all stop bombing us and fucking with us. Become a communist. Challenge the billionaires in the Epstein class that have ruined this world and turned it upside down. Okay? That's the message we need to be telling these radical, right-wing, young white men. That if you really want to see the change in the world that you want the Europe to be all white again, because trust us, we don't want to be around y'all either. Stop fucking with us. Stop fucking with the global South. We will gladly go back to our homes if y'all embrace communism and give us back our wealth as well. Reparational justice is on the table as well. Okay? So, make that make sense. Okay? Anyway, shout out to Bakalu Baka up in the live stream and everybody else joining. I want to ask you, Bakalu Baka, joining the conversation, do you think that we are living in pre-revolutionary times, similar to what Trotsky is talking about in the history of the Russian Revolution? Do you think that right around the corner, we will have mass workers movement, mass worker mobilization, fighting against the oligarchy, the billionaire Epstein class, the capitalist bourgeoisie that make our life a living hell? Are we living in those times? Bakalu Baka 8661. Answer that question, please, sir. Answer that question, please. I will be awaiting your answer, and I look forward to an engaging conversation. Anyway, I will continue here. Things went a little better with the southern pillar of the military party, the ataman of the Don Cossacks, Kaledin. They were saying in Petrograd that Kaledin was mobilizing the Cossack army and that echelons from the front were marching to join him on the Don. Meanwhile, the Ataman, according to one of his biographers, was riding from village to village, far from the railroad, peacefully conversing with villagers. Kaledin actually did conduct himself more cautiously than was imagined in revolutionary circles. He chose the moment of open revolt, the date of which had been made known to him in advance, for making a peaceful round of the villages in order that during the critical days he might be beyond control by telegraph or otherwise, and at the same time might be feeling out the mood of the Cossacks. On the 27th, he telegraphed his deputy, Bagayevsky, "It is necessary to support Kornilov with all means and forces." However, his conversations with the villagers were demonstrating at just that moment that, properly speaking, there were no means or forces. Those Cossack wheat growers would not think of rising in defense of Kornilov. When the collapse of the uprising became evident, the so-called troop ring of the Don decided to refrain from expressing its opinion until the real correlation of forces has become clear. Thanks to these maneuvers, the chiefs of the Don Cossacks succeeded in making a timely jump to the sidelines. In Petrograd, in Moscow, on the Don, at the front, along the course, followed by the echelons, here, there, and everywhere, Kornilov had his sympathizers, partisans, friends. Their number seemed enormous to judge by telegrams, speeches of greeting, newspaper articles. But strange to say, now, when the hour had come to reveal themselves, they had disappeared. In many cases, the cause did not lie in personal cowardice. There were plenty of brave men among the Kornilov officers, but their bravery could find no point of application. From the moment the masses got into motion, the solitary individual had no access to events. Not only the weighty industrialists, bankers, professors, engineers, but also students and even fighting officers found themselves pushed away, thrown aside, elbowed out. They watched the events developing before them as though from a balcony. Along with General Denikin, they had nothing left to do but curse their humiliating and appalling impotence. Quoting once again Sun Tzu, if you have not read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, Sun Tzu says, "The best battle is one you don't even have to fight, and yet you still win." And what we are looking at here is a bloodless collapse within the counter-revolutionaries. We are witnessing that. We are witnessing that right now. All right? Bakalu Baka, in response to the question I posed of, are we living in pre-revolutionary times? He says, we are too pacified as a people. First and foremost, I want to know who you mean as we. Do you mean people in mass? Are you talking about a particular people? But when it comes to pacification, in both instances, whether you're talking about a particular group, I would assume black people, or we, as in the masses of people, I would argue to some degree, yes. But also, people are becoming more radicalized, in my opinion, and what I am witnessing when I watch the news or when I'm engaging in my political discussions. People are becoming extremely more critical of capitalism. People are becoming extremely more critical of American empire. You would argue, in Trotsky's time, as he began this book, that at the same time, in early Russia, in Imperial Russia, people were pacified as well. Most people were illiterate. Most people could not follow what was happening. They were only concerned about their own little world. But yet and still, with the continuing degradation of their living conditions, with the continued travesty and brutality of the war that was senseless, that caused young Russian men to die on behalf of a ruling class that couldn't give a fuck about them, I'm witnessing so many parallels right now to what is happening in America, or what has been happening in America. I would say all of my lifetime. All of my lifetime, that's what I have witnessed. But tell me, what have you seen? What have you seen? Because everybody has their own circle. Everybody has their own experience. When you are talking to people, are you witnessing people becoming more critical of capitalism, more critical of American empire, or are you not having those discussions? Are you not even talking about that with the people in your life, whether it be online or in person? Continuing here, Highlight says, Germany is currently the binding force of the European Union, but it is definitely entering an era of the radical right with the rise of the AfD. The vassal policy towards the U.S. has led them to this. I don't know if the vassalization of Germany necessarily, impels the right or compels the right to to success in Germany, because America right now is actually considered by, right-wingers internationally as the forerunner of the type of fascism they want to implement in the European countries. Here in Hungary, where I'm at right now, seeing the comments that I get on my YouTube channel and also witnessing what's happening in the news and the media, the right wing here is motivated by what they see in America. And I would also argue that it goes both ways because, pause, no diddy, it goes both ways, no diddy. But Donald Trump didn't get the idea of build the wall from nowhere. Guess what they have on Hungary's southern border? A big-ass border wall. Guess what? Before Trump came in office talking about all the migrants have to go, no refugees, zero, except the white ones from South Africa. Guess what Hungary did? Refused to accept refugees and migrants, even at their own detriment, because the European Union started fining them $1 million a day and also withholding funds to fund Hungary. So I don't believe I agree with that last part. Highlight, you're making a good point that the right wing is on the march in Germany, but I would argue that if you polled a lot of those German right-wingers, they would say America is the best country in the world right now. We love what Trump is doing with ICE. We love the imperialism. We love that he supports Israel, all this other shit. I'm pretty sure if you talk to most of those AFD people, they would say, yeah, we love J.D. Vance, Trump, all that. There's a reason why Elon Musk goes on these Zoom calls in front of thousands of AFD guys and also the racists in Belfast as well, and tells them, keep going, keep on taking your country back. And then there's a Roman salute on that ass. You know what I'm saying? But let me know. Tell me what you think. I like that topic right there. Anyway, let's continue here. We only have a few more pages left in our live stream. This has been a very engaging one, even though we had technical difficulties earlier. Okay, there's only about 5 or 6 more pages left, so we might be on live, let's say, for about 20 to 25 more minutes or so. Okay, so we'll start right here. On the 30th of August, the executive committee sent to all Soviets the joyous news that there is complete demoralization in the troops of Kornilov. They forgot for the moment that Kornilov had chosen for his undertaking the most patriotic units, those with the best fighting morale, those most protected from the influence of the Bolsheviks. The process of demoralization consisted in the fact that the soldiers had decisively ceased to trust their officers, discovering them to be enemies. The struggle for the revolution against Kornilov meant a deepening of the demoralization of the army. That is exactly the thing of which they were accusing the Bolsheviks. The generals had finally got an opportunity to verify the force of resistance possessed by that revolution, which had seemed to them so crumbly and helpless, so accidentally victorious over the old regime. Ever since the February days, on every possible occasion, the gallant formula of soldier braggadocio had been repeated. Give me one strong detachment and I will show them. The experience of General Kabalov and General Ivanov at the end of February had taught nothing to these warriors of loud mouth. The same song was frequently sung, too, by civilian strategists. The Octoberist Shidlovsky asserted that if in February there had appeared in the capital a military detachment, not especially large but united by discipline and fighting spirit, the February Revolution would have been put down in a few days. The notorious railway magnate Bublikov wrote, "One disciplined division from the front would have been enough to crush the insurrection to the bottom." Several officers who participated in the events assured Denikin that one firm battalion under a commander who knew what he wanted could have changed the whole situation from top to bottom. During the days of Guchkov's war ministry, General Krymov came to him from the front and offered to clean up Petrograd with one division. Of course, not without bloodshed. The thing was not put through merely because Guchkov did not consent. And finally, Savinkov, preparing in the interest of a future directory his own particular, August 27th, asserted that 2 regiments would be amply sufficient to make dust and ashes of the Bolsheviks. Now fate had offered to all these gentlemen, in the person of the happy general, full of the joy of life, an ample opportunity to verify the truth of their heroic calculations. Without having struck a single blow, with bowed head, shamed and humiliated, Krymov arrived at the Winter Palace. Kerensky did not let pass the opportunity to play out a melodramatic scene with him, a scene in which his chief effects were guaranteed their success in advance. Returning from the prime minister to the war office, Krymov ended his life with a revolver. Damn, he committed that. Thus turned out his attempt to put down the revolution, not without bloodshed. Oh, how tragic. Oh, how tragic. The right-winger tasked with putting down the Bolshevik revolution. He tells Kerensky, the liberal leader of Russia, just give me a few good men and I'll crush those dirty communists. He sends his men out there to Petrograd to fight those dirty communists. Those dirty communists end up converting his soldiers to his side because they have the right outlook. He goes back to his boss Kerensky and says, I'm so sorry, boss. Walks into his bedroom, closes the door, puts the pistol to his head and blows his brain out. Blows his brain out. Oh, how fitting. Mwah. Mwah. Nothing brings the right and the left together more than when a fascist does that. Nothing brings the right and the left more together than when a fascist does that. Why does it bring the left together? Because somebody has taken the life of a fascist. So we salute that person for committing that. And also because right-wingism, fascism, is essentially a death cult. When somebody commits that, you have done the ultimate task. The ultimate task of fulfilling your duty of living out your ideology. All right? So, let's go here. So, highlight says, vassal politics have caused stagnation and deindustrialization. The worsening economy is boosting the extreme right, which shifts economic issues towards migration and blames minorities. Absolutely. I'm not discounting that. But I would not say that, the right wing is so, obsessed or upset by America having like 30 military bases in Germany. I don't know how many. But I do know that every German woman has sucked a black cock. I do know that. I do know that for sure. But yeah, I don't think that the vassal politics, you have to explain what you mean more by vassal politics. Because when I think of the vassalization of Germany, first and foremost, that sounds very right-wing coded. Because the way German leaders, liberal leaders, would put it, and the way American politicians put it, is that with Germany we have a special relationship. The same way, they talk about the UK. You're a part of our team. You're a part of the Western Bloc of nations, and we have bases here to protect you from, Russian aggression and also kind of from yourselves. That's like the code there. And the Germans generally have been cool with that. They get free health care. They make sure all their citizens get, great retirements and good jobs and safety by and large by not having a military. You know what I'm saying? So what do you mean by vassalization? Because vassal politics can just mean that Germany makes sure that they always stay on America's good side to get the military expenditures outsourced to America. So explain what you mean by vassal politics of Germany. I believe that, stagnation and deindustrialization of Germany is just a cause of the international capitalists, deciding that it's cheaper to build BMWs in India than it is in Munich. You get what I'm saying? And once again, that gives us the answer to a right-wing concern. Why are there no more jobs in Frankfurt? Well, they went to Mumbai. Okay, and it wasn't because the Indians decided to pick them up on their backs and move the factory. No, it's because the rich capitalists that own Mercedes, BMW, whatever, decided that, it's more important to keep their cost low for production rather than give German men and women and citizens in general good working jobs. Okay, that's just a part of capitalism. I don't get how that's a part of vassal politics. If you mean vassalization as in, all states essentially become vassals of capitalist interests, then yes. Okay, but other than that, I don't know what you're getting at. So please explain that. Anyway, in the Winter Palace, they breathed more freely, having concluded that a matter so pregnant with difficulties was ending favorably, and they decided to return as soon as possible to the order of the day. That is, to a continuation of the business which had been interrupted. Kerensky appointed himself commander-in-chief. From the standpoint of preserving his political ties with the old generals, he could hardly have found a more suitable figure. As chief of the headquarters staff, he selected Alexeyev, who 2 days ago had barely missed landing in the position of prime minister. After hesitating and conferring with his friends, the general, not without a contemptuous grimace, accepted the appointment, with the aim, as he explained to his own people, of liquidating the conflict in a peaceful manner. The former chief of staff of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Nicholas Romanov, thus arrived at the same position under Kerensky. That was something to wonder at. Only Alexeyev, thanks to his closeness to headquarters and his enormous influence in high military circles, so Kerensky subsequently tried to explain his wonderful appointment, could successfully carry out the task of peacefully transferring the command from the hands of Kornilov to new hands. Exactly the opposite was true. The appointment of Alexeyev, that is, one of their own men, could only inspire the conspirators to further resistance, had there remained the slightest possibility of it. In reality, Alexeyev was brought forward by Kerensky after the failure of the insurrection for the same reason that Savinkov had been summoned at the beginning of it. It was necessary at any cost to keep open a bridge to the right. The new commander-in-chief considered a restoration of friendship with the generals now especially needful. After the disturbance, it will be necessary to inaugurate a firm order, and accordingly a doubly strong power is needed. At headquarters, nothing was now left of that optimism which had reigned 2 days before. The conspirators were looking for a way to retreat. A telegram sent to Kerensky stated that Kornilov, in view of the strategic situation, was disposed to surrender the command peacefully, provided he was assured that a strong government will be formed. This large ultimatum the capitulator followed up with a smaller one. He, Kornilov, considered it upon the whole impermissible to arrest the generals and other persons most indispensable to the army. The delighted Kerensky immediately took a step to meet his enemy, announcing by radio that the orders of General Kornilov in the sphere of military operations were obligatory upon all. Kornilov himself wrote to Krymov on the same day. An episode has occurred, the only one of its kind in the history of the world. A commander-in-chief accused of treason and betrayal of the fatherland and arraigned for this crime before the courts, has received an order to continue commanding the armies. This new manifestation of the good-for-nothingness of Kerensky immediately raised the hopes of the conspirators, who still dreaded to sell themselves too cheap, in spite of the telegram sent a few hours earlier about the impermissibility of inner conflict at this terrible moment. Kornilov, halfway restored to his rights, sent 2 men to Kaledin with the request to bring pressure to bear, and at the same time suggested to Krymov, if circumstances permit, act independently in the spirit of my instructions to you. The spirit of those instructions was, overthrow the government and hang the members of the Soviet. General Alexeyev, the new chief of staff, departed for the seizure of headquarters. At the Winter Palace, they still took this operation seriously. In reality, Kornilov had at his immediate disposition a battalion of St. George, the Kornilovist infantry regiment, and a Tekhensky cavalry regiment. The St. George battalion had gone over to the government at the very beginning. The Kornilovist and Tekhensky regiments were still counted loyal, but part of them had split off. Headquarters had no artillery at all. In these circumstances, there could be no talk of resistance. Alexeyev began his mission by paying ceremonial visits to Kornilov and Lukansky, visits during which we can only imagine both sides unanimously squandering the soldierly vocabulary on the subject of Kerensky. The new commander-in-chief, it was clear to Kornilov, as also to Alexeyev, that the salvation of the country must in any case be postponed for a certain period of time. So now they're just throwing their hands up in the air saying, we can't even do a coup. We're not even good at this. How are we going to save the country? Continuing here. But while at headquarters, peace without victors or vanquished was being so happily concluded, the atmosphere in Petrograd was getting extraordinarily hot. And in the Winter Palace, they were impatiently awaiting some reassuring news from Mogilev, which might be offered to the people. They kept nudging Alexeyev with inquiries. Colonel Baranovsky, one of Kerensky's trusted men, complained over the direct wire. The Soviets are raging. The atmosphere can be discharged only by a demonstration of power and the arrest of Kornilov and others. This did not at all correspond to the intentions of Alexeyev. I remark with deep regret, answers the general, that my fear lest at present we have fallen completely into the tenacious paws of the Soviet has become an indubitable fact. By the familiar pronoun we is implied the group of Kerensky, in which Alexeyev, in order to soften the sting, conditionally includes himself. Colonel Baranovsky replies in the same tone, God grant that we shall get out of the tenacious paws of the Soviet into which we have fallen. Hardly had the masses saved Kerensky from the paws of Kornilov when the leader of the democracy hastened to get into agreement with Alexeyev against the masses. We shall get out of the tenacious paws of the Soviet. Alexeyev was nevertheless compelled to submit to necessity and carry out the ritual of arresting the principal conspirators. Kornilov offered no objection to sitting quietly under house arrest 4 days after he had announced to the people, I prefer death to my removal from the post of commander-in-chief. The Extraordinary Commission of Inquiry, when it arrived at Mogilev, also arrested the Vice Minister of Communications, several officers of the General Staff, the unarrived diplomat Aladin, and also the whole personnel of the head committee of the League of Officers. How ironic and what a twist. Kornilov and Kerensky were going to get in bed together to maintain power and maintain the status quo, and instead Kerensky arrests Kornilov for trying to stage a coup, acting as if he didn't know. It's just all silly. It's like hard to even take these people seriously. All right. So highlight says in regards to Germany, I think their sovereignty, once again, everybody, class, please do not use pronouns. I know he's talking about Germany, but for anybody joining the conversation, it would be good not to use pronouns. So that way people know exactly what you are talking about. I think Germany's sovereignty was made impossible after World War II and that after unification. It was subordinate to the interests of the USA, especially foreign policy, which always falls in line with the US. The social program was created as a response to Soviet socialism, where capitalism with a humane face will be acceptable to German workers. So, once again, I don't think that the argument that Germany has a strong social safety net and free health care and shit we can never imagine in America is only because of, the Soviet communist system showed a different way that society could be organized, that society could be made more in the interest of the working class, therefore causing European countries to implement that. I'm not disagreeing with that. Of course, Soviet influence had a big part of making a lot of these European countries adopt these social programs that we can't imagine in the US. But how are they able to afford it? It has largely been because their military-industrial complex has been subsidized heavily by the United States. We either tell them that they can't have a standing army similar to Germany, or we heavily subsidize their army so that the citizens don't have to pay for it out of their own tax dollars, thus allowing the state to offer to their citizens great things. So I do think those two things work in tandem. There's more than one reason why, something happens. It's not just solely one thing. But I agree with you, highlight, that German sovereignty is questionable because it's under the thumb of American empire. I would argue that there are only a handful of sovereign nations in the world. Because, let's say, for example, Jamaica is not having any problems with the U.S. as far as I know. But is Jamaica a sovereign country if at any moment Jamaica can become Grenada? We send soldiers there to kill their leader and topple their government. Let's say Jamaica made the mistake of choosing communism, in the words of Henry Kissinger. Let's say Jamaicans made that mistake. Is Jamaica really a sovereign nation? No. No nation is really sovereign unless they have nuclear weapons. It's at the very basis. At the fundamental level, no nation is really sovereign unless they have nuclear weapons. So literally we live in a world where there are countries pretending to be sovereign and other ones that really are, such as America, Russia, China, North Korea, Israel, maybe? I don't know. But yeah, Germany has been influenced by American empire, but I don't think American being in the shield of American empire as a core part of NATO somehow has caused the degradation of life for the German working class. I don't believe those two things are inextricably tied. Okay? I think capital interests have made it so that the German working class is seeing a degradation in their quality of life. And being a part of the American empire does not make that better. But I don't think that is solely the reason why shit is fucked up in Germany. Okay? So, Highlight says, sorry about the pronouns. It's due to a lack of characters. Anyway, you make a good point. Thank you. It's only for the people that are going to watch this in the playback, if they are unaware of the conversation, that they know what you're referring to. And also for me as well, because sometimes I'll be forgetting what y'all are talking about or what question you're replying to. But, the pronouns are unhelpful sometimes. Anyway, we're nearing the end of this chapter. We only have a page and a half to go. So, get your comments together. But what do y'all think? What do y'all think? Do you think, being a part of NATO, being a part of the American military umbrella has led to the degradation in the quality of life of the working class in primarily Europe? Do you think that is an aspect of it? Because I don't, it's hard for me to put those two together. It's hard for me to put those two together. Do you think being a part of NATO, the American military, umbrella, somehow leads to degrading quality of life for the average European? Let me know what you think. Anyway, during the first hours after the victory, the compromisers gesticulated ferociously. Even Avksenstiev gave out flashes of lightning. For 3 whole days, the rebels had left the front without any command. Death to the traitors, cried the members of the executive committee. Avksenstiev welcomed these voices. Yes, the death penalty was introduced at the demand of Kornilov and his followers. So much the more decisively will it be applied to them. Stormy and prolonged applause. The Moscow Church Council, which had 2 weeks ago bowed its head before Kornilov as the restorer of the death penalty, now beseeched the government by telegraph, in the name of God and the Christ-like love of the neighbor, to preserve the life of the erring general. Other levers also were brought into operation. But the government had no idea at all of making a bloody settlement. When a delegation from the Savage Division came to Kerensky in the Winter Palace, and one of these soldiers, in answer to some general phrases of the new commander, said that the traitor commanders ought to be ruthlessly punished, Kerensky interrupted him with the words, "Your business now is to obey your commander, and we ourselves will do all that is necessary." Apparently, this man thought that the masses ought to appear on the scene when he stamped with his left foot and disappear again when he stamped with his right. We ourselves will do all that is necessary. But all they did seemed to the masses unnecessary, if not indeed suspicious and disastrous. The masses were not wrong. The upper circles were most of all occupied with restoring that very situation out of which the Kornilov's campaign had arisen. After the first few questions put by the members of the Inquiry Commission, relates Lukomsky, it became clear that they were all in the highest degree friendly toward us. They were in essence accomplices and accessories. The military prosecutor, Shablovsky, gave the accused a consultation on the question how to evade justice. The organizations of the front sent protest. The generals and their accomplices were not being held as criminals before the state and the people. The rebels have complete freedom of communication with the outside world. Lukomsky confirms this. The staff of the commander-in-chief kept us informed about all matters of interest to us. The indignant soldiers were more than once felt an impulse to try the generals in their own courts, and the arrestees were saved from summary execution only by a counter-revolutionary Polish division sent to Baikov, where they were detained. On the 12th of September, General Alexeyev wrote to Milikov from headquarters a letter which reflected the legitimate indignation of the conspirators at the conduct of the big bourgeoisie. which had first pushed them on, but after the defeat left them to their fate. You are to a certain degree aware, wrote the general, not without poison in his pen, that certain circles of our society not only knew about it all, not only sympathized intellectually, but even to the extent that they were able, helped Kornilov. In the name of the League of Officers, Alexeyev demanded of Vishengradsky, Pudilov, and other big capitalists who had turned their backs to the vanquished, that they should collect 300,000 rubles for the benefit of the hungry families of those with whom they had been united by common ideas and preparations. The letter ended in an open threat. If the honest press does not immediately begin an energetic explanation of the situation, General Kornilov will be compelled to make a broad exposure before the courts of all the preparatory activities, all conversations with persons and circles, the parts they played, etc. As to the practical results of this tearful ultimatum, Denikin reports, only toward the end of October did they bring to Kornilov from Moscow about 40,000 rubles. Milikov, during this period, was in general way absent from the political arena. According to the official cadet version, he had gone to the Crimea for a rest. After all these violent agitations, the liberal leader was, to be sure, in need of rest. We have one more paragraph left, so if you have any comments or questions, please put them in. I'll try to answer them before we shut it off after the final paragraph. For the people in the horizontal live stream, I deeply apologize, but my computer died midway during the reading, so I cannot read the comments in the horizontal live stream. But if you have a pertinent question you would like to ask before the end of the live stream, please put it in the vertical live stream and I'll try to get to it. Going to the comment here from Highlight. I think one of the main reasons why social welfare programs are strained in Europe is that the American empire has forced other NATO members to pay a higher percentage for defense. That is a serious indicator of the friction between the working class and NATO. That is a very, very good point, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think also to some degree that we're also seeing a decline in the social programs in Europe. Like, for example, in Hungary, where I am right now, people openly say that their public health care system is trash. And that is not an accident. It's purposefully done by design. They have private insurers here. Private insurers are fairly cheap here. Fairly cheap. I would say cheaper than they are in the US for sure. And they cover more for you if you were to be in the hospital. But it's by design. There are capital interests here in Hungary that want to make sure that the public services, such as the public schools, such as the public transportation, such as the hospitals, continue to see degrading qualities. So yes, on one hand, Hungary was asked to pay more to NATO by the Trump administration and also by every previous presidential administration. They just looked the other way when they didn't do it. I think the last time I checked, many European nations still are not paying the amount that they need to or that they were requested to by the Americans. And, what is the reason that's happening? First and foremost, they probably don't have the money. They probably realize it would cause social unrest if they did actually defund the hospitals and the public transport to actually reach that 2% goal of GDP to fund their military. And also at the same time, I do believe from my interactions with Europeans that there are some, remaining Marxist, socialist, and high levels here, and they see the play. They see the play that essentially spending 2% of your GDP on military spending like the Americans are requesting is essentially America trying to rip them off. Because the weapons that they're being asked to buy, the planes that they're being asked to purchase, the tanks that they're being requested to cop are all American made. So it's essentially basically a way to funnel money to Lockheed Martin, to Boeing, to Smith & Wesson, and all the American manufacturers who make billions every year through government contracts, more than they do by, providing to the general public. You have to realize that, America's only industries are essentially pornography, hip-hop, and guns. Those are the only three things America produces that the world seems to want. Don't even want our movies now. They're all on K-pop. They're all on Korean films. Barely want our movies. They only want, they only want Billie Eilish's big titties. They only want to see, Travis Scott rage. And they only want our M16s. That's all they want. Okay, and that's all we have to sell the world, unfortunately. All right. Stefano is talking about something else entirely. This will put him in the re-education camp. Okay? All right, continuing here. Final paragraph. Any comments or questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to it. The comedy of the Inquiry Commission dragged along until the Bolshevik insurrection, after which Kornilov and his accomplices were not only set free, but supplied by Kerensky's headquarters with all necessary documents. These escaped generals laid the foundation of the Civil War. In the name of the sacred aims which had united Kornilov with the liberal Milikov and the black hundredist Rimsky-Korsakow, hundreds of thousands of people were buried. The South and East Russia were pillaged and laid waste. The industry of the country was almost completely destroyed, and the Red Terror imposed upon the revolution. Kornilov, after successfully emerging from Kerensky's court of justice, soon fell on the Civil War front from a Bolshevik shell. Kaledin's fate was not very different. The troop ring of the Don demanded not only a revocation of the order for Kaledin's arrest, but also his restoration to the position of ataman. And here too, Kerensky did not miss the opportunity to go back on himself. Skobelev was sent to Novocherkassk to apologize to the troop ring. The Democratic minister was subjected to refined mockeries conducted by Kaledin himself. The triumph of the Cossack general was not, however, long-lasting. Pressed from all sides by the Bolshevik Revolution breaking out on the Don, Kaledin, in a few months, ended his own life. The banner of Kornilov then passed into the hands of General Denikin and Admiral Kolchak, with whose names the principal period of the Civil War is associated. But all that has to do with 1918 and the years that followed. Damn, Trotsky just out here giving spoilers. Trotsky is saying that, Kornilov, eventually we killed him. Yeah, the Bolsheviks shot Kornilov. We took out that fascist. And all the other fascists that came out, they eventually either took their own lives or, we handled them. And, saying that, the right-wing revolution the right-wing counter-revolution in Russia ended up being picked up by General Denikin and Admiral Kolchak. Names a bit more famous if you're more familiar with the Russian Civil War, etc. But anyway, that was an interesting chapter. Once again, Trotsky's going over with a fine-tooth comb the details of the counter-revolution and why the Bolsheviks were successful. I find that chapter to be very good. I like this book even more, especially after going out last night, touching grass, chatting with real communists in person here in Hungary. You know what I'm saying? It's good to come to this and not feel like you're going crazy because, I'm reading these texts a lot of the times and it's just, me solo breaking down these texts, giving my ideas and hoping it reach somebody out there in the ether, as well as fighting against fascists and white supremacists in the comment section. But, reading this just gives me more commie revolutionary inspo, which was the purpose of picking up this book in the first place. So glad that we're actually getting that in full force here. Okay, we're going to shut down the live stream. So once again, like I said, all comments and questions will be handled now. We only have the vertical live stream going now as I try to fix my computer. Sorry to anybody in the horizontal live stream. The only comments we have is highlight saying, damn, you really don't like the... That's a stupid comment. Okay, what communist likes the U.S.? Okay? What communist likes American empire? And going beyond that, it's not hard to see that I'm a black man. My ancestors were put on auction blocks sanctioned by the U.S. government. So it's always fuck America. It was fuck America before I even went full-on red. Before I became a full-on red, it's always fuck America. But that's a stupid comment to say. I'll call you out for that highlight. You've been giving some good points. But if you think that you're going to come across a black, male, cisgendered, very handsome and sexy communist like me and be surprised that I have a distaste for American empire That's really fucking dumb. That's really dumb. So, anyway, I guess that's a final comment we'll deal with. Let me try to fix my computer. It's been a pleasure chatting it up with everybody and reading this text. We might go on live later to do a call-in show. Okay? So, yeah. All right, Highlight says, that's just a humorous dig. Didn't mean to insult you. No, I'm not. It's just y'all have to put in, y'all got to be better at displaying the sarcasm. Y'all got to be better at displaying the sarcasm. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. Y'all got to get better. I would like to see some jokes in the stream making fun of right-wingers and their beliefs, man. That's what I would like to see. That's the type of humor I like. You know what I'm saying? Talking to a black man being like, damn, you really don't like the U.S. Nigga, there was a thing called slavery. That's crazy. Anyway, I digress. I will catch y'all possibly tomorrow for episode 34 as we read chapter 33. All power to the people. All power to the people. And peace.